Flywheel in the barn. Telephones were rare in the village. Only the gentry, the doctor, and the traders had them. They seemed to be used only for serious matters, such as sick calls to the doctor, for placing orders, or for general small emergencies. They were not considered a mechanism for idle chat. Some little way from our family house lived two elderly spinster sisters. One owned and operated a couple of petrol pumps, and the other gave piano lessons. They also had a telephone, with a sign outside the house saying, "You may telephone from here." Father would, from time to time, get a visit from the younger spinster, with a message that he was needed as a farmer's machinery had broken down. Sometimes the call would be late in the evening, when Rose would arrive, clad in a long, heavy leather overcoat, perhaps a First World War flying jacket, her nightie hanging out below and just short enough to show the Wellington boots. She never seemed to be put out or upset by these demands. It was just part of the service that went with having a phone. The repair visits were nearly always a chance for me to stay up late. Staying up late was an ambition shared by many of my friends, for we were usually sent to bed at what would now seem a very early hour. On these occasions, I was allowed to carry out a most important task, that of holding the light. Whatever my father was expected to put right would inevitably be in a barn or shed which had little light or none at all. Mother would already be preparing a flask of tea and perhaps some biscuits if we were lucky. The toolbox would be collected from the workshop and carried to the garage in the Austin Ruby Saloon. Father worked a few miles from home and was allowed petrol coupons for work-related journeys. Most destinations in these nocturnal forays would be in the Mendip Hills, and most likely to a farmer not on mains electricity. They usually had their own generator to power the milking machines and domestic lighting. Loss of lighting did not matter greatly to farmers, who before the war would have had paraffin lamps, but loss of power for milking was a very serious problem, as by then there were more cows in their herds than they could milk by hand. Farmers in general were not very good at servicing equipment. It usually got used until it broke, and then remained unfixed until needed again, when panic ensued. My blacksmith uncle would despair at this attitude. He would be short of work during the winter while the machinery that needed repair stood idle, often rusting in the fields. "I got the hay to cut tomorrow. And then at the start of the haymaking, everyone would be clamouring for their equipment to be repaired first. I'm on it now. The jobs that came my father's way were all emergencies that could not wait, and almost always would be electrical or mechanical failure of either the engine or the generator. These power sources were the most amazing and varied collection of usually worn-out petrol or oil engines, long past their prime and nearly always adapted to a different job to which they had been built to perform. Add to that, neglect and being kept in a decrepit shed or barn meant that making a repair was always difficult. I went to many farms with father on these missions, but one visit has remained very clear in my memory. The farm was run by two ancient brothers and their wives. There didn't seem to be any young people around. The brothers always wore brown warehouse coats over cord trousers with gaiters and hobnail boots, and cloth caps which never seemed to be removed. Father and I were led into the barn by the brothers, their hurricane lamps making swinging shadows that leapt forwards and backwards as we passed a row of cider butts as tall as a man, and then racks of batteries and glass sulfuric acid bottles, wrapped in straw in their metal stillages on the floor. Beyond was the monster, a single-cylinder oil engine with two flywheels as big as a cartwheel. Father was busy with his electric circuit tester, and it was all too easy for me to let my concentration lapse in this Aladdin's cave. My reverie would be quickly cut off short by a cuff on the head for not attending to the business in hand. The circuit had to be tested by starting the monster. A blow lamp had already been lit and was roaring fiercely in the dark, its bright pink-blue flame lighting the faces of the two brothers, like a late Rembrandt portrait. The flame was directed onto the end of the cylinder, which, within a short time, was glowing hot. The fuel was turned on, and the brothers standing each side of the flywheel turned it slowly by pulling on the massive spokes. Foot, 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 foot. The engine began to make a slow, thumping noise. The brothers quickly grabbed an empty Hessian sack apiece, placed it on their shoulders, and leant on either side of the wheel as it revolved. This puzzled me, and by the look on his face, horrified my father. As soon as the engine had reached its operating speed, the two brothers stopped leaning on the spinning wheel, much to my father's relief. The circuit was mended. Power was being produced to turn the flywheel on the other side of the engine, which had a wide canvas belt on it that snaked and hummed into the darkness further off in the barn, where it turned some equally ancient generator. I found it difficult to leave the scene. The swaying, sinuous belt, like an ever-returning snake, and the flickering spokes of the flywheel, mesmeric. In the farm kitchen, the two wives had tea poured out, along with cheese sandwiches, on plain white plates, and a large uncut fruit cake. I would dearly have liked a slice of that cake, but feared that if it was offered to my father and he declined, I would feel unable to accept. The two brothers now explained that they had to steady the flywheel when the oil engine was started and stopped, because the main bearing was badly worn, and without the steadying they feared that the axle would snap. The chances of getting a new bearing and a replacement for the axle were remote, so they soldiered on in this horrible way. No mention of money was made. They were as poor as we were, but, like my father, were rich in skills and practical experience. Even so, offers would be made, a piece of smoked bacon or some dredged corn for our chickens. What was dredged corn, I wonder? Father having made a choice, we would stumble out into the dark and muddy yard, the car, and the journey home. Father was quiet for some time as we motored back down into the valley, and then, speaking more to himself than to me, he voiced his concern that these two old men should twice a day risk life and limb to control old and dangerous machinery. If the axle broke, he said, that flywheel would take both of them through the back of the barn, cider vats and all.